golden deed,
by helping those,
who are in need,
My life on earth,
is but a span,
and so I'll do,
the best I can.
Life's evening sun,
is
sinking low,
A
few more days, and I must go,
to meet the deeds, that I have done, where there will be no setting sun, to be a child of God each day, my light must shine along the way. I'll sing His praise while ages roll, and strive to help some troubled soul.
Life's evening sun,
is
sinking low,
a
few more days, and I must go,
to meet the deeds, that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. The only life that will endure is one that's kind and good and pure. And so for God, I'll take my stand. Each day I'll lend a helping hand.
Life's evening sun,
is
sinking low,
a
few more days, and I must go,
to meet the deeds, that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. I'll help someone in time of need, and journey on with rapid speed. I'll help the sick and poor and weak, and words of kindness to them speak.
Life's evening sun, is sinking low, a few more days, and I must go,
to meet the deeds, that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. While going down life's weary road, I'll try to lift some traveler's load. I'll try to turn the night to day, make flowers bloom along the way.
Life's evening sun,
is
sinking low,
a
few more days, and I must go,
to meet the deeds, that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be, as long as life endures. And when this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall possess within the veil a life of joy and peace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Angry words, oh, let them never from the tongue unbridled slip. May the heart's best impulse ever check them ere they swell the lips. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the blessed command. Love is much too pure and holy, friendship is too sacred far, for a moment's reckless folly thus to desolate and mar. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the blessed command. Angry words are lightly spoken, bitterest thoughts are rashly stirred. Brightest links of life are broken by a single angry word. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the blessed command. Anywhere with Jesus I can safely go, anywhere He leads me in this world below, anywhere without Him, dearest joy.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Great. Okay. Welcome to the Wednesday night Bible study of the Broad Street Church of Christ in Lexington. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm going to start out with a prayer. In a moment, I'm going to ask Brother Arness to lead us in prayer. Anyone have any requests or things we should be mindful of? I'm not seeing any hands.
Our daughter's having a C-section in the morning.
Okay.
Let's keep her in prayer.
Yes. It's exciting, but pray that everything goes well. Anything else? All right, Brother Arness.
Lord, let's bow. Heavenly Father, we come to you at this time in prayer to give thanks for the blessings you give us daily. We're most thankful, Father, for your love and for sending Christ to this earth to go through what he went through and died, that our sins may be remitted as we obey you, the gospel, and stay faithful to you. We pray, Father, for all those in the prayer list, and we're especially mindful of Katie, that you will be with her and the baby tomorrow. Those that are giving care to her, doctors and nurses, perform the procedure, and have a beautiful little girl enter into the world. Bless them and their families in all things. Father, we pray that your worship will be pleasing to you tonight. Be with all the teachers that are conducting classes. Pray for Kay that you be with him. What he's prepared for us tonight from your word, that he will present it to us, that we will focus and pay attention so that we can take these things to apply to our daily lives, that we may live faithfully to you, and that others will see Christ living in us. Bless us in all things, Father. We pray that you'll forgive us for any sin that we may have. For this we ask in the name of Jesus the Christ, your Son and our Savior. Amen.
Thank you. Thanks. So Bill Ousley did not learn his lesson from last time and asked me to teach again. But I think we're having a series on Wednesday nights in here, lessons from the Sermon on the Mount. I think Jonathan taught last week. Is that right? And Bill is teaching next week. And my topic is our influence on the world. And it's taken from Matthew 5, verses 2 through 16. Matthew 5, 2 through 16. This, of course, is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and most of us are probably familiar with these verses. We have the Beatitudes, followed by Jesus' salt and light metaphors. And I was wondering if we might just read verses 2 through 16. Does anyone want to volunteer to read those verses for us? Okay, Brother Weir.
Then he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your God, your Father in heaven.
Great, thank you. So as I said, I think we're all pretty familiar with these verses. I know they were memory verses in Bible class when I was a kid, and when I took the Life of Christ class at Freed Hardeman, I'm pretty sure this entire passage was part of the memory verse requirement. But as I was reading these verses in light of my assigned topic, our influence on the world, I began to wonder if we could view the Beatitudes as a way that we can influence the world. And by that I mean I wondered if we could view, because I kind of view these as two sections, right? You have the Beatitudes, and then you have the salt and light metaphors. I think it's pretty clear the last four verses, 13 through 16, are speaking about our influence, right? We're salt and light, and we need to show our good works to others so that they can see them and glorify the Father. But thinking that maybe we could also view verses 3 through 11 as symptoms of the condition that Jesus calls us to be in 13 through 15, or 13 through 16, excuse me. So the idea that if we exhibit the Beatitudes, then that is how we can be salt and light. So tonight I'd just like to go through the Beatitudes as far as we can get. Maybe we can get through all of them, and discuss three questions. What does the Beatitude mean? What's just kind of a basic definition? How can we practice it in our daily life? And how do those actions influence the world around us and shine our lights and be salt to the earth? So, we won't have time to go very in depth through these, of course. So I'd actually want to encourage you to go back on Facebook or YouTube. At the beginning of this year, or starting, I think, the end of last year, Justin did a Sunday night series on each Beatitude. Those are really great lessons that I shamelessly draw from later on as we're talking, but definitely worth your time to go back and look at those lessons. But having said that, I thought we might just go right in with the first one. So Matthew 5, verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Okay, so what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Sorry? Humble, okay. Yes. Definitely not arrogant. Good. Yep. Other thoughts? Yeah, I think poor, when I read poor in spirit, I thought of Psalm 51, right, where David is talking about a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart, right? So the idea of going to God humbly and recognizing that we're broken. I think when Justin spoke about this, he called it, or he said that someone who's poor in spirit is someone who recognizes that they need God for everything, right? That we're nothing without God. He gives us our blessings. He gives us what we need to survive. Other thoughts on what poor in spirit means? Okay, how can we practice it in our daily life? Or if not daily, how can that be sort of a character trait that we regularly exhibit?
It's an attitude of putting others before ourselves.
Okay, say more. So that's okay. Putting others before yourself. Okay, good. Other ways you can practice being poor in spirit.
I think it requires like an ongoing self-evaluation and being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Being aware of your attitudes and what you're thinking, and, keeping that humble.
Yeah, yeah. So being aware of your attitudes, constantly assessing your attitudes, I agree with that. Thinking about, or keeping in mind where, the blessings that you have come from, right? And recognizing that God gave that to you and can take it away as well. So exhibiting those things, I think Brother Larry sort of got us there. But if we exhibit being poor in spirit, or if we are poor in spirit as a sort of way of being, how can that be salt and light to the world?
Okay, when you're poor in anything, you realize you need something.
Mm-hmm.
If you're poor in spirit, then you're not really strong in you. So you realize you need God. So if you need God, then the way you live and do, other people are going to see this too. So you living your life being, they may think that he may not have a whole lot, but he's evidently got God because he lives for God. And we know that God will give us strength. So that would kind of help us to live if we kind of feel like that we do need him, and we do need him, and that even though we don't have him. If you don't have anything, just like anything else, you don't have much money or don't have much food, then you're going to appreciate whenever you get it. You're going to appreciate it more so than somebody's got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. I think if you are continually grateful and satisfied with what you have and know that you need God, then that's going to show other people that they need God, right? And, if someone knows that we're Christians, but we act sort of arrogant, Brother Johnny, if we act arrogant, then, they're going to be a little suspicious. But if we're humble and recognize that all of our blessings come from God and that we need God in our life, even though, we're Christians, we try to do good, and we, maybe abstain from things that the world partakes in, but we still are, we still need God, and showing that that's a continual thing that we are pursuing, right? Brother Ron, you acted like you were going to say something.
Yeah,
Steve.
I think kind of a prime example of this was Jesus washing the disciples'
Mm-hmm.
feet. He could easily have looked down on them. He was, after all, or is, after all, God, and had never sinned. But he showed the humility. He didn't, and I think in the same way we have to be careful to say, "Oh, look at that guy. He's just a drunkard," or something like that. And I would never do anything like that.
Right.
I think that's kind of the opposite of what the way Jesus is telling us that we should be here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so maybe there's an element of, I don't want to put words in your mouth. There's an element of not being judgmental or recognizing the famous phrase, "But for the grace of God, go out." Yeah, okay, good. Other thoughts on poor in spirit before we move on? Yeah, John.
Yeah, so if we go back to like Proverbs 16, verse 18, verse we're all familiar with, pride cometh before the fall, and pride goes before destruction. Later down it says, a haughty spirit before a fall. It says, better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. And then at the end of 20, skipping down, it says, and whoever trusts in the Lord, happy is he.
So, read that again, sorry.
The last one,
Yeah, what you just read, I'm sorry.
that's Proverbs 16, verse 20, the end of it, it says, and whoever trusts in the Lord, happy is he.
Trust in the Lord, happy is, got it. Yes, absolutely. So kind of a warning there, right? What happens if we're not poor in spirit? There could be a lesson on the opposites of the Beatitudes, right? That would be an interesting lesson to have us think about some things to warn against. Okay, just for the sake of time, let's move on to the next one. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Okay, so I think we all have a pretty good working definition of what mourning means. But obviously, well, hopefully, that's not something that we do regularly, right? But I think it's something that all of us either have or will do at some point. So what's good about mourning? Why is mourning a positive thing here for Jesus?
Many times we mourn or grieve over the loss of life, but when you do that, then you realize that your time on earth is short, it's a vapor, it makes you look, reevaluate maybe how you spend your time, and then, of course, when a Christian dies, you do mourn because you'll miss them, but then you're comforted because, you know, they're in a better place, and they're not in pain anymore, and you've got better things to look at.
Yeah, I agree. When you mourn the loss of someone, you obviously are reminded of your own mortality, and when you mourn someone in the faith, then there's still mourning for sure, but there's rejoicing as well. Could it be just that people who mourn are blessed simply because they are turning to God and they know that God is the source of comfort, right? I think about 2 Corinthians, where Paul is describing God who's able to comfort us during our affliction. Galatians 6, talking about bearing one another's burdens, mourning with those who mourn. So mourning is a communal activity, right? So if you lose someone, then you're sharing in that loss with your family or your fellow Christians.
You know, that he was the sinner and he's comforted because God forgave him of his sins and he's able to be a great servant for God.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it. I haven't thought about that. So sort of mourning your past because you regret the things you did, regret that you, I guess in Paul's case, regrets that he didn't come to his senses sooner. Yeah. Other thoughts on that or anything else related to mourning?
We also mourn, as Sally said, for the loss of a loved one, but it also makes you realize that you wouldn't have anything to mourn for if you had not had that love. A love that you never had and you never lost.
Yeah.
You've lost out, so you have something to mourn for.
Yeah, that's a good point. And mourning can help us realize the blessings that we've had. That's definitely true.
That are there for us during those times, whether it be one thing or another. We all mourn at times, and we need one another.
Yes, so we can use mourning as a way of growing closer to each other, for sure. So how can the way we mourn as Christians, how can that influence the world? How can that influence those around us?
Depends on how we react.
Okay.
If we still continue to show our faith in God, even in this morning, those around us will see that faith.
Yeah, exactly. Riddler said, if we continue to show our faith in God, despite or throughout our mourning, people around us will see that faith, right? And, if we display our faith during that really sad time in our life, or if, we know and tell others, taking comfort in the fact that, we'll see the deceased again, right? If they're in the household of faith, right? So, turning it into a way of thinking about the hope of heaven, right? And the hope and fear of eternity, I think is a way that the way we mourn can influence the world. Any other thoughts about that?
You go through hard times.
Mm-hmm.
And most of us in here has been through, you look at most Christians' life, particularly someone who's stuck with the faith, they've been through some awful hard times.
Yep.
But if you draw closer to God and grow, they're going to see that.
Yep.
And they're going to really look at that and go, wow. Whereas if you don't, and you become bitter, and you resent, and you turn from God, then they'll see that. So you have an opportunity during that time to really show your faith.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So mourning is an opportunity to really show our faith, is what Miss Sally said. Very well put. I agree completely. Yes.
I think I look at James chapter 4 in verse 6. James is talking about, he says, God, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And he's speaking to the proud people, the people who are proud. A little bit farther down, he says, purify your hearts, your hearts, double-minded.
Mm-hmm.
Be wretched and mourn and weep. Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you. So again, he's talking about pride a lot, and God opposes the proud and exalts the humble.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think, I came across this as I was sort of preparing for the lesson. Here James is talking about sort of what Brother Johnny was mentioning earlier, sort of mourning sin, right? Or mourning, or at least have, a attitude of sorrow toward the evil, right? Good.
I think it seems like you're talking more about mourn the fact that you're a proud being and not dependent on God.
Right, yeah.
You're forgetting, you're taking credit for things yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Other thoughts? All right, so the next verse, verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This is a harder one. So what does it mean to be meek? Let's start off there.
One definition I've heard is strength under control.
Strength under control, okay? Say a little bit more about it. Strength under control.
As far as inheriting the earth, I think of a good friend of ours that passed away years ago. That's Harold Griggs. And he did inherit a lot of this, working for it. God blessed him with a lot of this world's goods.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a man that really was meek, strength under control, but he was humble. And he was a mentor to me.
Yeah. So strength under control meaning you have your you're not short-tempered. Or is that what you're thinking? Is that what you're talking about? Not being short-tempered
Right.
or having, a
That would fit.
a level. Okay, good. Level-headedness. Yeah. Steve, you were going.
And this is very similar. I had heard and asked Justin about this, and he agreed that the word used there is used at times to refer to the idea of like a horse that's been broken, and not broken in spirit, but broken to work.
Right.
So that, a horse is a lot more powerful than a person, and yet, and probably knows that, yet kind of allows itself to be guided by the person and doesn't. So the idea of meek is not necessarily milquetoast as much as being able to rein in what your power, what you're able to do, or what you, Justin talks about Jesus, could have called 10,000 angels.
Right.
Put an end to everything, but he didn't.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I see
Okay.
this in this context.
I like that. Yeah, so Brother Steve said meekness is about being willing to be subject to God or someone else, right? Is that fair to say? Yeah. So there's an element of submission associated with meekness, submission, surrender. Even though you could easily not be. Okay, got it. Even though you could easily not be. Yeah, I agree. I think when Justin spoke about this, he talked about how meekness is more about your actions toward others. So, I think about James 1:19, talking about being gentle and soft-spoken. Of course, the word Jesus is maybe not necessarily quoting from, but his audience would have been familiar probably with Psalm 37:11, the meek shall inherit the earth and delight themselves in abundant peace. Receiving more the less we want. So meekness is maybe the outward expression of humility and how we act toward other people. Other thoughts on meekness?
The meekest man on earth, according to the Bible, was Moses.
Yep.
And we see the type of leader that he was.
Yeah.
He really said that he wasn't able to do it, but with God's help, he was.
Yep.
Accomplished a lot.
Yep. For sure.
And Jesus said he was meek. He said, I'm meek and lowly in heart.
Right. So, definitely an attribute to work toward. So we've kind of gotten to the third question of how does being meek influence the world? I think we could say it shows a way to be more like Christ, right? Ultimately, if we're meek and esteem others higher than ourselves. Okay, verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. That might be a little more straightforward, but what does it mean to hunger and thirst for righteousness? You want it, you strive for it.
Maybe you want it for others also.
You want it for others also, okay. So we're hungering and thirsting for righteousness for ourselves, but also for others. So that means that we are, what does that mean that we're doing? Telling people about God, trying to act like Jesus, right? Have a few verses here. James 4:7-8. Draw near to God and he'll draw near to you, right? So this idea of pursuing God, the more we pursue God and the closer we draw to God, then he will draw near to us. Romans 12, verse 2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So there's an activeness or level of activity associated with hungering and thirsting for righteousness, and it's something related to pursuing something, right? And there's something that we might not ever we won't ever fully achieve at this side of heaven, but something that is still worth going after. Any other thoughts on that?
You could have said, blessed are those who desire righteousness or work for righteousness.
Right.
But if you're hungry and thirsty, there's not much else on your mind.
Right.
If you desire something, you can be distracted from it. But if you need something to eat,
Yeah.
that's your first priority.
And you can't think clearly until you get that, or you can't focus on much else until you get something to eat or a drink. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah.
I think associated with that idea of if righteousness would be, how do you learn what righteousness is, would be study of the word.
Right.
So does it
force you to, look more into the scriptures, into the word to learn what is right and what is not right, and then you can share it with others. But it comes down, you got to get in the word yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Miss Allie said, associated hunger and thirsting for righteousness with Bible study and learning more about what righteousness looks like, for sure. Yeah, so obviously if we're hungering and thirsting for righteousness and the world sees that, then, they're going to be hopefully interested in, what is fueling that on our part, right? Or at least they know that something is different about us, or they see us as, worthy representatives of the church, of Christianity, right? Any other thoughts on hungering and thirsting for righteousness? I don't think we're going to get through everything, but that's okay. That's okay. Yes.
I was just going to say, in living that way, righteousness means right doing. So then if you're righteous person, if you hunger and thirst for it, and then you find it, then you're living right. So the way you live is the way other people are seeing you. If you treat them like they should be treated, if you do what the scripture says, then you're doing righteousness. Then if you're hungry and thirsty after this is what you want to do, and then when you start doing it, then that way they can see it living in you, and you can have influence on them.
Yeah, I agree. So they can see the way that God calls us to live, right? If we are hungry and thirsting for righteousness. Good, okay. Alrighty. Next one is merciful, right? Yeah, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. So I think we've received the ultimate example of mercy, I think, right? In God's forgiveness through Christ. So how can we be merciful in our daily life? Yep. We'll get that later in the Sermon on the Mount. Somebody else was going to say something. No.
It's the same thing that
Okay.
it teaches us if you don't forgive others, God will not forgive you.
Yep.
Basically the same thing. You have to show mercy because you were shown the ultimate mercy.
Exactly. Yep. Have to give what we've received, which we will see later on in Matthew 7, right? Judge not, because you're going to have the same measure of judgment given back to you.
Kate, I think about the story Jesus told of the debtors in the Bible. One man owed a lot, and he was forgiven. And then he went to a man that owed him a little, and he wouldn't forgive him.
Yep.
And it backfired on him, and it came back to him. He did not obtain mercy.
Yep.
He was not merciful.
Agreed.
I think this one comes back to humility too,
Yeah. Goes back to humility.
if not all of them.
Yeah, right. I was just thinking but I think you're right. I mean, all of them do go back to humility and meekness and, submission to God, submission to what he calls us to do. Okay, verse 8, pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Justin taught on this. He talked about how this word for purity is related to the Mosaic law's concern about purity. They would make a big deal about what is pure, what's been touched, what's not been touched. But Jesus is talking about purity in the heart. So, the idea that it's not, purity is inward and not outward, right? Makes me think of when Jesus says later that it's not what goes in a man that defiles him, but what comes out of a man, right? Think about 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. Says the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. So a pure heart involves sincerity and delighting in pure doctrine. So are we sincere and well-meaning in what we teach and how we teach it to those around us? Think back to Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart, O God, right? So purify our inward feelings and being. Other thoughts? Pure in heart. So if being pure in heart is an inward thing, then how does being pure in heart influence the world? How does our being pure in heart influence the world?
Well, it's not very hard to understand when somebody's not sincere.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody is like that, you can understand they're not pure in heart.
Yeah. So
If we have pure motives,
yeah, okay, that's good.
we display those to the people around us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like this day in time is kind of, people are we're fairly skeptical as a society, so that sometimes makes it hard when you're trying to talk to someone about the Bible. Or am I giving the correct impression that I'm being sincere and I'm doing this out of nothing but concern for them? Definitely true.
Okay?
Yes.
For example, that happened where I work at today, talking about pure in heart, what comes out of your mouth. There was this lady in the store, and she was saying something real good and everything, and then she come out with a curse word.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I'm a Christian, I shouldn't do that. Well, if you're a Christian, you're pure in heart, that won't come out.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is, if you're pure in heart, it ain't gonna come out. Them bad words don't come out, because you're not gonna do it because you're a Christian. If you're that way, but that just shows you how the world is, how they'll tell you that they're a Christian or something like that, but you see by their action the way they are, so people can see you where you're Christian, but what you say and where you act.
Yeah, for sure. So the idea that if you're pure in heart, then it'll be clear, our motives will be clear by the way we act just in general and act in the world, not just when it comes to talking about spiritual things, but how we conduct ourselves around other people and treat other people. That leads actually into verse 9 pretty well. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. So what is a peacemaker?
The Bible talks about living peacefully with all men.
Yep, I have that written down here.
As much as you can. Now, there's some people, no matter what you do, and it talks, kind of about that.
Yeah.
But, you don't keep butting your head against the wall. You just kind of move on, and then, but as much as is within you, try to live peaceably with all men. And I think it's just a thing of not being contentious.
Mm-hmm.
Having to have your way about everything. I think of the classic examples in life of somebody they have a property line. And, if a leaf drops over that property line, or you're mowing and so, you're going to be contentious and things like that. But it's just, Christ came to earth to bring peace, between man and God. And so I think that's just when you try to not always be nitpicking and looking for things, but that's part of the transformation of Christ, that you need to seek peace with others.
Yep.
But you can't always do that.
Right. Well put. Yep. as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all, right?
I also think a peacemaker, to me, is you've got a brother and sister, or sister and sister in Christ, and they've gotten hot under the collar about something, and a peacemaker is another brother or sister in Christ who kind of helps calm the situation down some of that, so that they can, get it together.
Right, yeah. So someone who not only doesn't cause tension themselves, but is able to ease tension. I think that's good.
I kind of think about Jesus and the woman at the well.
Mm.
There's a man talking to a woman, which was not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
A Jew talking with a Samaritan, which was not
Not
a
a
thing.
thing.
And she was kind of poking at him,
Yeah.
You say that we're going to worship here, or that, we're supposed to work, and he didn't escalate that.
Right.
But he didn't back off of it either.
Mm-hmm.
He just kind of found the common ground, talked to him about that, and then before you know it, she's running back to the town going, hey, you got to meet this guy.
Yeah.
So you find yourself in a situation that could easily be, well, I'm right and you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And instead you say, well, where do we agree? Let's start there
Mm-hmm.
and work our way.
Yeah. That's a great illustration. Yeah. That's a great illustration. The story of Jesus and the woman at the well, if anyone didn't hear, lots of political baggage there, right? Even before it started. And then the conversation sort of goes on, and the way Jesus handles it is a great example of making peace. So a peacemaker is someone who doesn't stir the pot, right? Which is sometimes difficult not to do. Someone who seeks resolutions. Does forgiving others play into this at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it does. It goes back to being merciful as well, right? So this tells us that it's incumbent upon us to make peace with people that we have grievances against, right? Or who might have a grievance against us. Jesus is going to say that, right? If you are at the altar and remember that you have, conflict with your brother, then you need to go away and make sure that that is resolved. The only other note I had that I haven't mentioned, 1 Thessalonians 4:11 says to live quietly, tend to your own affairs, right? So just, live your life, try to be as peaceable as possible. And I think that will be a good example to others of a different way of living in the world, right? Those of us, if we don't thrive on conflict or don't enjoy, riling people up or getting angry or what have you. All right. Let's see. We have exactly 1 minute left. Missed a couple, but that's okay. The final point I just wanted to make was that, we've talked about all of these things and actions and ways of being that Jesus calls us to exhibit. And we have talked about them in light of how they influence other people. But I'd like to just sort of button this up by rereading verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So, if we are doing these things, practicing these things, then that's going to not glorify us, but it's going to glorify the Father, which is what Christianity is all about, and it's what Jesus was all about, our relationship with Him and how we can bring more people to Him. So thanks so much for your attention. Bill, you got it next week?
Yep.
What's your topic?
The model
The model prayer. Great. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the week.